The late summer sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Durango as Sheriff Luke Allen made his evening rounds, his weathered boots leaving faint impressions in the hard-packed earth. At 45, Luke had seen enough violence along the territorial borders to last several lifetimes. But something about this evening felt different, an electric tension in the air that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His mother's Sioux blood had gifted him with an uncanny sense for trouble, though he kept that heritage carefully hidden beneath his badge and the respected Allen family name. A commotion near the livery stable drew his attention, where Nathan Lopez, the town's youngest deputy, came running toward him with panic etched across his face. "Sheriff, riders coming in from the north. They've got a prisoner. Looks like they caught one of them Sioux warriors that's been raiding the Carter family's cattle." Luke's hand instinctively moved to the well-worn grip of his Colt as he quickened his pace, his mind already racing through the implications of such a capture in these troubled times. The scene unfolding at the edge of town made Luke's blood run cold. Three rough-looking men had a young Sioux brave tied to a horse, his proud face battered but unbowed. Luke recognized the prisoner's elaborate chest tattoo. This was Yellow Shield, son of a respected medicine man whose territory lay just beyond the border. The captors, led by a scarred mountain man who introduced himself as Isaac Hall, claimed they'd caught the warrior red-handed during a raid. But Luke had known Yellow Shield's family for years through his mother's connections, and something about this story didn't add up. Eleanor Carter, the widow who ran the largest ranch outside Durango, stood watching from her wagon with troubled eyes. Her husband's recent death had left her vulnerable to land grabbers and opportunists, and Luke suspected this capture had more to do with forcing the Sioux off their traditional hunting grounds than any actual cattle rustling. The tension between settlers and natives had been growing worse by the day, with Eleanor's ranch sitting right at the powder keg's heart. As Luke approached the group, he noticed Yellow Shield's eyes widen slightly in recognition. The warrior had seen the hidden medicine pouch Luke wore beneath his shirt at tribal gatherings. It was a secret connection between them, one that complicated Luke's duty as sheriff immensely. The law said he should lock up the accused raider, but his mother's teachings about honor and truth pulled him in another direction. He could feel Eleanor watching him, waiting to see how he'd handle this volatile situation. The town was rapidly gathering to witness the spectacle, including Joshua Nelson, the banker who'd been trying to pressure Eleanor into selling her land since her husband's death. Luke noticed how Nelson stood close to Isaac Hall's group, a little too interested in their prisoner. The pieces were starting to come together in Luke's mind. A false accusation against the Sioux would give the settlers an excuse to push them further from the disputed territories, leaving Eleanor's land vulnerable to those who'd been coveting it. Charlotte Lopez, Nathan's wife and the town's schoolteacher, pushed through the crowd with their young son Caleb. She was one of the few people in Durango who knew of Luke's mixed heritage, having helped tend to his mother in her final days. Her presence reminded him of the delicate balance he maintained between two worlds: the badge that represented territorial law and the blood that bound him to ancient traditions. The weight of both responsibilities pressed down on him as he assessed the increasingly volatile situation. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of crimson that seemed to mirror the tension in the street. Luke could feel the crowd's bloodlust growing. They wanted swift justice, wanted to believe the worst about the Sioux warrior before them. But he'd sworn an oath to uphold the law fairly for all people, and he'd seen too many innocent natives wrongly accused by those with hidden agendas. Yellow Shield's quiet dignity spoke volumes, and Luke knew he would have to risk everything to uncover the truth. Rose Carter, Eleanor's fiercely independent daughter, rode into town at that moment, her arrival causing a stir among the gathered crowd. At 19, she had her mother's steel spine and her father's gift for reading people. Luke watched as she took in the scene, her eyes narrowing when they fell on Joshua Nelson's satisfied expression. She had fought against the bankers' attempts to take their land as hard as her mother had, and Luke suspected she might know something about what was really happening here. As darkness crept over Durango, Luke made his decision. He would hold Yellow Shield in protective custody while he investigated the true story behind this capture, knowing that his choices over the next few days would either bridge the growing divide between two peoples or spark a war that would consume them all. The shield of law and justice he carried would have to protect both the innocent and the accused, regardless of the color of their skin or the blood in their veins. His mother's spirit watched from beyond, and Luke Allen would not dishonor her teachings or his father's name with a hasty judgment. The first rays of dawn painted Durango's weathered buildings in shades of amber as Luke made his way to the jail, his boots crunching on frost-covered dirt. The morning air held the bite of approaching winter, reminding him that time was precious. Inside the cell, Yellow Shield sat cross-legged on the floor, his stoic presence filling the small space with an energy that made the iron bars seem almost irrelevant. Luke studied the Sioux Brave's face, noting the quiet dignity that reminded him so much of his mother in her final days. She had taught him that truth, like a river, always found its path regardless of the obstacles in its way. Yellow Shield met his gaze with eyes that held neither fear nor anger, only patience, the kind that came from generations of living in harmony with the rhythms of the land. Caroline appeared at the jail door, carrying a basket covered with a red checkered cloth. Steam rose from beneath it, carrying the scent of fresh cornbread and coffee. "Thought you might need breakfast," she said, her voice carrying the same practical kindness that had helped their mother hold the family together after their father's passing. As she set out the food, Luke noticed her hands trembling slightly, betraying the tension she worked so hard to hide. Behind her came Nathan, Luke's deputy and oldest friend, his usually easy manner replaced by a troubled frown. "Joshua Nelson's been stirring up trouble at the saloon since sunrise," he reported, keeping his voice low. "Claims he's got witnesses who'll swear Yellow Shield was caught stealing cattle. But something doesn't add up. The timing's wrong, and the tracks I found tell a different story." Luke nodded, remembering the peculiar boot prints he'd noticed yesterday. Too fresh, too deliberately placed. He'd seen similar setups before, when powerful men needed an excuse to provoke conflict. The question was why Nelson, a banker who'd always preferred to wage his battles with paperwork and foreclosures, would suddenly risk open violence. Caroline moved closer to the cell, her skirts rustling against the rough wooden floor. "The Henderson family reported their entire herd missing 3 days ago," she said quietly. "But Isaac saw Nelson's men driving cattle north toward Pueblo yesterday morning. Said the brands looked fresh. Too fresh." Her eyes met Luke's, carrying the weight of unspoken suspicion. Yellow Shield spoke then, his words careful and measured in the trader's English he'd learned years ago. "The shield your mother gave to save my life," he said, touching the sacred object that lay beside him. "It protects more than flesh. It shows true path when lies make clouds in men's hearts." The Brave's words struck Luke like physical blows, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle he'd been trying to solve. Outside, the sound of approaching horses broke the morning quiet. Luke moved to the window, recognizing Joshua Nelson's expensive bay stallion among the riders. The banker had brought reinforcements, hired guns from the look of them, their well-oiled weapons gleaming in the early light. This was no longer just about one Brave or missing cattle. Nelson was making his play for something bigger. Caroline's hand found Luke's arm, her grip fierce with determination. "Mother always said the land remembers," she whispered. "The truth leaves tracks deeper than any lie." Luke covered her hand with his own, feeling the strength of their shared heritage flow between them. Yellow Shield's shield caught the sunlight, its ancient symbols seeming to shift and dance with hidden meaning. In that moment, Luke saw his path forward with crystal clarity. Nelson's scheme, whatever it was, threatened not just Yellow Shield or the Henderson family, but the very peace their parents had worked so hard to build in this border territory. The shield of justice his badge represented would have to stand against not just physical weapons, but against the darker forces of greed and prejudice that sought to tear their community apart. As Nelson's men dismounted outside, Luke straightened his spine and checked his weapon. The time for investigation was giving way to the time for action. Whatever came through that door, he would face it with the wisdom of his mother's teachings and the unwavering courage of his father's example. The true test of his family's legacy was about to begin. Sheriff Luke Carter stared at the strange shield in his hands, its polished surface gleaming with an otherworldly sheen beneath the afternoon sun. The Sioux warrior he'd rescued from those bounty hunters had pressed it into his grip with trembling hands, speaking in broken English about its power to turn aside any weapon. Luke hadn't believed it then, but after what he'd witnessed in Durango's dusty streets yesterday, he was starting to question everything he thought he knew about the world. The shield's intricate designs seemed to shift and flow like water when he wasn't looking directly at them. Delicate spirals and mysterious symbols traced patterns that made his eyes ache if he studied them too long. His daughter Caroline kept asking to touch it, but something in his gut told him to keep it hidden away. Word of its power would spread fast in a border town like Durango, where desperation and greed often overwhelmed common sense. Joshua Lopez, the local blacksmith, had been the first to see the shield in action. He'd been working at his forge when three of Isaac Hall's men came looking for trouble, angry about Luke's interference with their hunting expedition that had nearly gotten that Sioux brave killed. The first bullet they fired should have taken Luke's head clean off. Instead, it had dissolved into golden sparks inches from his face. Luke's mind wandered back to the Sioux warrior's words. Shield carries spirit of ancestors, protects those who protect others. He disappeared into the night after that, leaving Luke with more questions than answers. The townsfolk were already whispering about witchcraft and dark magic, led by the zealous Reverend Nathan Allen, who seemed determined to paint Luke as some kind of demon-touched threat to their community. Caroline was the only one who truly understood what the shield meant. At 16, she had her mother's wisdom and an uncanny ability to see through to the heart of things. "It chose you, Pa," she'd said that morning over breakfast, "because you did what was right when others wouldn't." Luke wished he could share her certainty, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical thing. The trouble really started when Eleanor Nelson rode into town, claiming to be a collector of native artifacts. Her refined Eastern manners couldn't quite hide the predatory gleam in her eyes when she first caught sight of the shield hanging on Luke's office wall. She'd offered him enough money to buy half the county, but something about her set his instincts screaming. The way she watched him, calculated and cold, reminded him too much of a rattler sizing up its prey. Isaac Hall's involvement complicated matters further. The cattle baron had been pushing to expand his territory, using increasingly violent tactics to drive smaller ranchers off their land. The shield's appearance had drawn his attention like a moth to flame, and Luke had caught several of his men skulking around the sheriff's office at night. Hall's reputation for getting what he wanted by any means necessary was well earned. Charlotte Carter, Luke's wife, suggested they simply leave town, take the shield, and disappear into the vast territories where no one could find them. But Luke knew running wasn't the answer. The shield had been entrusted to him for a reason, and his gut told him that reason was somehow tied to the growing tensions between Hall's men and the native tribes whose lands they coveted. Josephine Lopez, Joshua's wife, brought word that riders were gathering at Hall's ranch, hard men with hard eyes and well-worn gun belts, the kind of men who solved problems with bullets and left questions for the Undertaker to answer. Luke found himself studying the shield's patterns more and more, wondering if its power extended beyond merely deflecting weapons. There were times he could swear he heard whispers emanating from its surface, ancient voices speaking in languages he couldn't understand. Rose Allen, the Reverend's daughter, had taken to following Caroline around town, asking questions about the shield and its origins. The girls had been friends once, before Nathan Allen's fear of the unknown had poisoned their relationship. Now, Luke worried that Rose was acting as her father's spy, feeding information back to those who would see the shield destroyed or claimed for their own dark purposes. The situation reached a boiling point when Caleb Nelson, Eleanor's brother, arrived with papers claiming legal ownership of all indigenous artifacts in the territory. The documents looked official enough, complete with territorial government seals, but Luke had been a lawman long enough to smell a forgery. The siblings' insistence that he hand over the shield immediately only confirmed his suspicions about their true intentions. As tensions mounted, strange events began plaguing the town. Livestock disappeared without a trace, mysterious lights danced in the hills at night, and more native warriors were spotted watching from the ridgelines than had been seen in years. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that the shield was somehow drawing them all together, weaving a complex web of destiny that would either save or destroy everything he held dear. One crisp morning, Luke stood at his office window watching Eleanor and Caleb engage in a heated discussion outside the general store. Their hushed voices and furtive glances only heightened his suspicion. He absently traced the intricate patterns on the shield hanging on his wall, its surface seeming to ripple like water in the early light. The more he studied it, the more convinced he became that its power extended far beyond merely deflecting weapons. Nathan, his trusted deputy, burst through the door with news that would change everything. "Luke, riders coming in from Durango, but these ain't ordinary travelers." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They're wearing military uniforms, but something's off about them." Luke had heard rumors of rogue soldiers working for wealthy collectors, men who would stop at nothing to acquire precious artifacts. The shield's presence had begun affecting the town in subtle ways. Crops grew fuller despite the drought. Wounds healed faster, and even the perpetually quarrelsome Joshua and Caroline Miller had stopped their daily arguments. But with these blessings came a price. More outsiders arrived daily, drawn by whispered stories of a mysterious Indian relic that could turn the tide of any conflict. Rose, the widow who ran the boarding house, reported that Eleanor had been asking strange questions about local Sioux burial grounds and sacred sites. The young woman's interest seemed scholarly on the surface, but Luke recognized the calculated nature of her inquiries. He'd seen that same careful probing in witnesses trying to hide their true motives. The situation grew more complex when Isaac, an old Sioux medicine man, arrived unannounced at Luke's door. The elderly man's weathered face showed grave concern as he explained that the shield was more than a defensive weapon. It was a key to ancient powers that could either heal or destroy the land itself. In the wrong hands, it could bring devastation beyond imagination. As dusk approached, Luke noticed more native warriors gathering in the hills, their numbers growing with each passing day. They maintained their distance, but their message was clear. They were watching, waiting. Through Isaac, Luke learned that different tribes were divided on whether the shield should remain with him or be returned to its original guardians. Charlotte, the schoolteacher who'd recently arrived from Wichita, proved an unexpected ally. Her knowledge of territorial law helped Luke identify subtle discrepancies in Caleb's documentation. The forged papers had originated from a notorious gang operating out of Pueblo, known for creating convincing but illegal documents for wealthy collectors. The rogue soldiers made their first move during the weekly supply delivery. Luke spotted them attempting to bribe Josephine, the telegraph operator, for information about his daily routine. Their leader, a hard-faced man with a colonel's insignia that didn't quite match his uniform, watched the sheriff's office with predatory patience. The shield's influence continued to grow stronger. During a confrontation with local troublemakers, Luke noticed that not only did bullets seem to curve away from him, but anyone standing near him appeared to share the same protection. The power was expanding, adapting, responding to some greater purpose that even Isaac couldn't fully explain. As tensions escalated, Eleanor's facade began to crack. Luke caught her late one night attempting to sketch the shield's markings by moonlight. Her excuses about scholarly interest fell flat when he discovered a coded message hidden in her sketchbook, meant for someone in Tucson. The mystery of who she really worked for deepened, adding another layer to the growing conflict. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between opposing forces that grew stronger by the day. The rogue soldiers, the native warriors, Eleanor and Caleb's hidden agenda, and the shield's expanding influence created a powder keg that needed only the smallest spark to explode. Luke knew he needed to uncover the truth about the shield's true purpose before that inevitable explosion tore everything apart. The next morning, Luke found Isaac waiting outside the sheriff's office, his weathered face etched with concern. The old Sioux warrior had sensed a disturbance in the shield's energy, something that went beyond its known protective abilities. He spoke of ancient warnings passed down through generations about powerful objects that could either unite or destroy, depending on the hearts of those who wielded them. Luke shared his suspicions about Eleanor, and Isaac's expression darkened. He explained that certain markings on the shield spoke of a twin artifact, a spear that could penetrate any defense, even that of the sacred shield. If both objects were united, they could grant unstoppable power to whoever possessed them. The revelation sent a chill through Luke's spine as he recalled Eleanor's mysterious sketches. The scorching afternoon sun beat down on Sheriff Luke Carter as he crouched behind the mystical Sioux shield, its ancient symbols glowing with an otherworldly blue light as bullets ricocheted harmlessly off its surface. Before him, the Lopez gang had taken positions throughout the main street of Pueblo, their rifles trained on his seemingly impossible defense. The shield, a gift from the Sioux brave Nathan Tallhorse, whom Luke had rescued months ago, was proving its worth in ways he never imagined possible. Eleanor Hall watched in horror from the window of her father's general store as more of Caleb Lopez's men emerged from the shadows, their numbers now reaching nearly 20. She had warned Luke this day would come, ever since he'd refused to let Lopez's outfit cross the border with their stolen Sioux artifacts. The shield Luke now held was meant to be among Lopez's plunder, and the outlaw's obsession with claiming it had only grown more dangerous with each passing week. "Last chance, Sheriff!" Lopez's voice carried across the dusty street, tinged with both fury and desperation. Hand over that shield, and maybe I'll let you keep breathing. The gang leader's usual swagger had given way to something darker, more primal. Luke could see it in his eyes. The man truly believed the shield's power was the key to his destiny. The same destiny that had driven him to raid sacred Sioux burial grounds and murder anyone who stood in his way. The shield's surface rippled like water as another volley of bullets struck it, the ancient magic within somehow knowing friend from foe. Luke's mind raced back to Nathan's words when he'd presented him with the gift. The shield chooses its guardian, and it has chosen you. Our ancestors knew this day would come, when the sacred and profane would meet in battle. At the time, Luke had thought it mere ceremony. Now he understood the true weight of that prophecy. Joshua Allen, Luke's deputy, had positioned himself on the roof of the saloon with his Winchester, picking off Lopez's men one by one when they exposed themselves. But even with his expert marksmanship, they were still drastically outnumbered. The streets of Pueblo had emptied as townsfolk barricaded themselves inside, leaving the space between buildings feeling like a vast desert of wooden planks and deadly intent. Charlotte Nelson, the town's schoolteacher, had gathered the children in the basement of the church, but Luke could still hear their muffled crying carrying across the tense silence between gunshots. He had sworn to protect this town, had given his word to both the territory governor and the Sioux Council that Pueblo would be a place where their peoples could coexist in peace. Now that promise was being tested in blood and bullet casings. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Lopez," Luke shouted back, trying one last time to reason with the man. "This shield isn't just some trophy, it's a sacred trust. The same trust you violated when you desecrated those burial grounds." He could feel the shield growing warmer against his arm, as if responding to his words, its blue glow intensifying with each passing moment. The response came in the form of a stick of dynamite arcing through the air toward him. Luke instinctively raised the shield, and what happened next defied explanation. The explosion seemed to fold in on itself, contained within a sphere of shimmering blue light before vanishing completely. A collective gasp rose from Lopez's men, and Luke saw fear replace greed in their eyes. The shield's power was greater than any of them had imagined. Isaac Carter, Luke's younger brother and the town's doctor, had been treating wounded townspeople in his clinic throughout the firefight. Through the clinic's window, he caught Luke's eye and gave a subtle nod. He had managed to get word to the Sioux camp outside town. If they could hold out just a little longer, help would arrive. The thought gave Luke renewed strength as he began advancing down the street, the shield before him like a wall of living light. Caleb Lopez's composure finally broke. "Burn it all!" he screamed to his men. "Burn every building until he gives up that shield." But as his men reached for their torches, a sound filled the air that made them freeze. The thundering of hooves and the war cries of 50 Sioux warriors led by Nathan Tallhorse himself, sweeping into town from the east like an avenging wind. The shield's glow pulsed in response, as if greeting old friends. The collision of forces was unlike anything the town had ever witnessed. Nathan Tallhorse's warriors swept through the streets like a cleansing storm, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the packed earth as Caleb's men scattered in panic. Luke stood his ground, the shield's ethereal light casting strange shadows across the weathered boardwalks and false-fronted buildings. He could feel the ancient power thrumming through his arms, responding to the presence of its original people. Isaac emerged from his clinic, medical bag in hand, moving swiftly between the fallen to assess the wounded on both sides. His dedication to healing knew no boundaries of faction or feud. Through the chaos, Luke caught glimpses of his brother's steady hands at work, binding wounds and offering comfort with the same quiet strength that had always defined him. Nathan Tallhorse dismounted in one fluid motion, his presence commanding instant attention, the warrior's dark eyes fixed on the shield, recognition and something deeper, perhaps destiny, reflected in their depths. "The medicine shield has chosen well," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden stillness. "It speaks of the path between two worlds as you have walked, Sheriff Carter." Caleb Lopez, cornered but still dangerous, barked orders at his remaining men to form a defensive line near the saloon. The desperation in his voice betrayed his fear, not of the warriors or the shield, but of failing the shadowy interest that had sent him to claim it. "You don't understand what forces you're dealing with," he snarled at Luke. "That shield belongs to people who will burn this whole territory to get it." The shield's glow intensified as if responding to the threat, its surface rippling with patterns that reminded Luke of starlight on water. He remembered the young brave he'd freed from Caleb's men weeks ago, how the boy's grateful smile had led to this moment of destiny. The shield belongs to those who protect, not those who destroy, Luke replied, his voice steady with conviction. Nathan moved to stand beside Luke, and the warriors formed a protective circle around them. The shield's light seemed to reach out to each Sioux warrior, creating a web of luminescence that connected them all. Isaac, finishing with a wounded man, straightened up and walked deliberately to join his brother, completing a triangle of alliance that transcended the old boundaries of race and culture. Caleb made his final, fatal mistake. Drawing a hidden derringer, he fired at Luke's unprotected back. The shield, though facing the wrong direction, flared brilliantly. The bullet curved in midair, describing an impossible arc before burying itself harmlessly in the dirt. The display of power left everyone, including Luke, in awe of the shield's true capabilities. The remaining outlaws threw down their weapons, their will to fight broken by the shield's demonstration. As Nathan's warriors moved to secure them, Isaac tended to the last of the wounded, and Luke finally lowered the shield, feeling the weight of responsibility more than its physical presence. The three men, sheriff, medicine man, and doctor, stood together in the dusty street, their unlikely brotherhood forged in the crucible of conflict. "The shield has shown us a new way," Nathan said, touching its surface reverently. "Not to divide our peoples, but to unite them. The old ones spoke of such a time." He looked at Luke and Isaac, his expression both solemn and hopeful. "Perhaps this is why it chose a man who stands between worlds to be its bearer." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield that their town had become, Luke realized that this was more than a victory over Caleb's gang. It was the beginning of something larger. A bridge between cultures, a chance to heal old wounds. The shield pulsed softly in his hands, no longer just a weapon or a relic, but a symbol of the change that was possible when ancient wisdom met modern justice. Isaac began organizing the townspeople to help with the wounded, while Nathan's warriors set up a protective perimeter around the town. The shield's power had brought them together, but it would be their choices in the days ahead that would determine whether this unlikely peace would last. Luke Carter, standing watch over it all, felt the weight of that future settling onto his shoulders like a familiar burden, one he was finally ready to bear. The night brought an uneasy quiet to the town, broken only by the soft chanting of Nathan's medicine men as they tended to the wounded. Luke stood at the edge of the makeshift infirmary, watching as both settlers and Sioux warriors lay side by side, their differences forgotten in shared suffering. The shield hung heavy at his side, its surface catching the flickering lamplight with an otherworldly gleam that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the healing songs. Isaac approached, his doctor's bag clutched tight in weathered hands. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered, nodding toward a young Sioux brave being treated by Caroline, one of the town's nurses. Caleb's attack might have done what years of treaties couldn't. The old doctor's eyes carried a mixture of hope and wariness, reflecting the delicate balance they now walked. Word of the shield's power had spread quickly, and Luke knew it wouldn't be long before others came seeking it. Already, riders had been spotted heading toward Durango, likely carrying news of the mysterious weapon that had turned back bullets like raindrops. The responsibility weighed on him as he remembered Nathan's words about standing between worlds. Eleanor, Luke's sister, emerged from the shadows of the general store, her face etched with concern. "Joshua's riders spotted smoke signals to the north," she reported quietly. "Nathan says they're from a rival band, one that's been raiding along the border." The fading sunset painted Durango's dusty streets in amber hues as Sheriff Luke Carter stood before the gathered townsfolk, the mystical Sioux shield strapped firmly to his back. Its ancient symbols seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy that had protected him through countless battles. Before him stood Joshua Lopez, the cruel rancher who'd orchestrated the ambush that nearly killed Running Eagle. The brave Luke had saved months ago. But now everything had changed. The shield's power had revealed a deeper truth about both men's heritage that would forever alter the fabric of their frontier town. Charlotte Allen clutched her father's weathered journal, its pages revealing the shocking connection between the Lopez and Carter families, a blood oath sworn generations ago when their ancestors first settled these lands alongside the Sioux. The shield wasn't just a weapon or a gift. It was a testament to that forgotten pact, passed down through time until fate brought it full circle in this moment of reckoning. My father's dying words make sense now, Luke announced to the crowd, his voice carrying across the tense gathering. The shield chose me because our families were meant to be guardians, not enemies. Joshua, your grandfather and mine swore to protect these lands together with the Sioux. We've forgotten who we truly are. The ancient symbols on the shield began to glow as if affirming his words. Joshua's weather-beaten face twisted with emotion as decades of hatred began to crumble. The range war he'd waged against the Carter family had been built on lies, tales of betrayal and theft that masked the truth of their shared legacy. His hands trembled as he reached for the leather pouch at his belt, withdrawing a tarnished silver medallion that matched the central pattern on Luke's shield. My grandfather's last gift, Joshua said hoarsely. I never understood its meaning until now. The medallion and shield resonated with each other, casting dancing lights across the spellbound faces of the townsfolk. Eleanor Nelson, the town's historian, stepped forward with trembling hands clutching ancient papers that would change everything they knew about Durango's founding. Running Eagle emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding silence. The Sioux brave who had gifted Luke the shield now revealed its true purpose, not just to protect one man, but to reunite two families whose destiny was intertwined with the very soul of the frontier. The shield's power had never been about deflecting bullets, but about reflecting truth and healing ancient wounds. The shield shows us what we have forgotten, Running Eagle intoned, his words carrying ancient wisdom. Your ancestors did not build walls between their peoples. They built bridges. The power you feel is not in the shield itself, but in the truth it reveals. The gathered crowd murmured as understanding dawned. This was no ordinary range war, but a test of their ability to remember and honor the past. Caroline Carter, Luke's sister, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. She had carried their father's last letter for years, never understanding its cryptic reference to the guardian's burden until this moment. The shield's mysterious power had drawn them all together, forcing them to confront a heritage that transcended petty feuds and greed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Luke and Joshua stood face to face in the town square. The shield pulsed one final time, its ancient magic having served its purpose. The two men clasped hands, not as enemies but as inheritors of a sacred trust. The townsfolk watched in awe as generations of misunderstanding and hatred dissolved in the face of undeniable truth. Running Eagle performed a sacred ceremony, binding the families once again in the presence of the Great Spirit. The shield's symbols transferred themselves onto both men's hearts, visible marks of their renewed commitment to the old ways. Charlotte recorded everything in her father's journal, ensuring that this time the truth would not be lost to time and pride. The transformation of Durango began that very night. The Lopez and Carter ranches merged, becoming a symbol of unity and strength along the territorial borders. The shield took its place in a specially built sanctuary, its power no longer needed now that its true purpose had been fulfilled. The ancient pact was renewed, and with it came a new era of peace. Josephine Lopez, Joshua's daughter, and Nathan Carter, Luke's son, were married the following spring, their union healing the last wounds between the families. The shield hung above them during the ceremony, its symbols now etched into the very foundations of the town itself. Running Eagle blessed their union, completing the circle that had begun generations ago. As years passed, Durango became known as a place where the old ways and the new existed in harmony. The shield's legend grew, not for its power to deflect weapons, but for its ability to reveal the truth that had always lived in the hearts of those who called the frontier home. Luke and Joshua became examples of how the West was truly one, not through violence but through remembering and honoring the sacred bonds between all peoples. The story of the shield and the reunited families became part of the territory's history, passed down through generations as a reminder that true strength lies not in weapons or walls, but in the courage to face the truth and embrace one's heritage. The frontier had changed them all, but in the end, it was their willingness to change that had saved them. In the decades that followed, the shield's presence in Durango became more than just a symbol. It became the cornerstone of a new way of life. Luke's grandchildren would often gather around him on cool evenings as he traced the intricate patterns with weathered fingers, telling them not just of its power to deflect arrows and bullets, but of how it had deflected hatred and fear from their community's heart. The old sheriff's eyes would mist over as he recounted those pivotal days, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through transformation. Joshua's family flourished alongside Luke's, their bloodlines intertwining through marriage and friendship until the distinction between settler and Sioux became as faded as the ancient pictographs on canyon walls. Their children learned both the ways of the modern world and the sacred traditions of their ancestors, carrying themselves with a dignity that drew curious visitors from as far as Tucson and Wichita, eager to understand how such harmony was possible in these contested lands. The Shield's influence spread beyond Durango's boundaries, becoming a beacon for those seeking refuge from the chaos of the changing territories. When tensions flared between ranchers and natives near Pueblo, delegations would travel to Durango, seeking counsel beneath the Shield's protective embrace. Its presence reminded all who gathered that the strongest walls were built not of stone or steel, but of understanding and respect. As the railroad pushed westward and new settlements sprouted like spring grass, Durango maintained its unique character. The town grew not through conquest or exploitation, but through the careful balance of progress and preservation. The old trading post where Luke had first encountered Running Eagle was preserved as a meeting place, its walls now adorned with both European and Native American artifacts, each telling its part of their shared story. Caroline, who had witnessed the Shield's arrival all those years ago, became the keeper of its history. She established a school where children of all backgrounds learned both traditional education and native wisdom. Her dedication ensured that the story of Luke's choice, to save rather than condemn, to understand rather than fear, would never be forgotten. The school became famous throughout the territory for producing leaders who could bridge the divide between worlds. The annual gathering that commemorated the Shield's gifting evolved into a celebration that drew people from across the frontier. Families would travel for days to participate in the ceremonies that honored both native traditions and settler customs. The smell of sage mixed with the aroma of traditional foods from both cultures, while songs in English and Sioux rose together into the crisp mountain air. As Luke entered his final years, he often sat with Joshua on the porch of the sheriff's office, now run by their grandchildren. They would watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, speaking softly of how their simple act of trust had rippled outward through time. The Shield, they agreed, had protected them from far more than physical harm. It had shielded their community from the poison of prejudice and the wounds of misunderstanding. When Luke finally passed, his funeral brought together faces from every corner of the territory. Native chiefs stood shoulder to shoulder with town officials, their presence a testament to the bridges one man's courage had built. The Shield was ceremonially passed to the next generation, not as a weapon or a talisman, but as a reminder that the greatest protection comes from the strength of unity and the power of acceptance. Years later, when historians would write of how the West was settled, they would point to Durango as proof that another path was possible. The Shield, still hanging in the town hall, continued to deflect not just weapons, but the very notion that different peoples couldn't live as one. Its legacy lived on in the faces of children who claimed both settler and Sioux heritage, in the songs that blended languages, and in the stories told around fires that burned bright against the darkness of division. The frontier had indeed changed them all, but Durango stood as testament to how change, when embraced with wisdom and courage, could forge something stronger than steel and more precious than gold. The Shield's true power, they came to understand, lay not in its ability to turn aside arrows, but in its power to turn hearts toward understanding and hands toward peace.